Glass exploded inward as the first bullet shattered my office window. The insurance policy in my hand wasn't just forged. It was my death warrant. David Sterling's signature glared up at me, but worse, my own auditor's name was scrawled at the bottom. The black SUV screeched to a halt outside, and I had exactly 3 seconds before the gunmen stormed in. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. "We have to move. Now." The hard drive in my pocket held the only proof, and if we didn't make it to the basement, 20 million reasons to kill me would vanish in smoke. The elevator doors wouldn't open fast enough. Too late. The scent of expensive mahogany and stale cigar smoke clung to the air in David's inner sanctum. Marcus Thorne pressed his thumb against the underside of the desk, tracing the seam until a hidden latch clicked. The drawer slid open with a metallic hiss. Inside, nestled beneath a stack of offshore ledgers, lay a single vellum folder. He flipped the cover, flipped. The document bore the familiar, embossed seal of Sterling Thorne Life and Casualty. $20 million. The sum glared from the page in bold, uncompromising ink. Marcus traced the signature at the bottom. His own name, forged with a terrifyingly accurate flourish. His pulse thrummed against his collar. The policy listed him not as the recipient of David's fortune, but as the deceased. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the Chicago skyline into smears of neon amber. Marcus gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles whitening against the dark wood. The paper crinkled under his touch. This wasn't a payout. It was a death warrant signed in his own hand. The math was chillingly simple. For David to collect, Marcus had to stop breathing. He looked at the date on the filing. It had been processed 3 days ago, right around the time David started insisting Marcus take a much-needed vacation to the coast. Marcus felt a cold sweat prickle his hairline. He wasn't just looking at a fraud. He was looking at the blueprint for his own liquidation. He reached for his phone to call his personal attorney, but his fingers froze. If the policy was already in the system, how many people in this building were already waiting for the hammer to fall? The heavy oak door groaned on its hinges. "Find what you need, Marcus?" David Sterling stood in the threshold, silhouetted by the dim hallway light. He swirled a glass of amber liquid, the ice cubes clinking like small bells. A faint crinkling sound came from his pocket, the unmistakable friction of a sugar packet being squeezed between his thumb and forefinger. Marcus tucked the folder under his arm, his muscles tightening. "The math doesn't add up, David. You insured a ghost." David stepped into the room, his silk robe whispering against the carpet. "Every investment requires a hedge. Surely you understand the necessity of a clean exit." He smiled, but his eyes remained as cold and flat as 2 coins at the bottom of a frozen lake. "You've been under a lot of stress, Marcus. People notice. They see the way you count your pens. They see the way you check the locks. It wouldn't take much for the world to believe you finally snapped." "I'm going to the board, David. I'm going to the police." "You're going nowhere," David said softly. As if on cue, the world outside the window erupted. A black SUV swerved onto the sidewalk 50 floors below, its tires shrieking against the pavement. The sound was a distant wail, but the violence that followed was immediate. The first shot shattered the reinforced glass of the lobby entrance far below, a sound like a giant stepping on a light bulb. Then, the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of high-caliber rounds began to chew into the building's facade. "Marcus!" The door burst open again, but it wasn't a gunman. Sarah Miller, Marcus's assistant, lunged into the room. Her thick-rimmed glasses were crooked, and her face was the color of unbaked dough. She didn't scream. Instead, She grabbed Marcus's sleeve with a strength that surprised him. "We have to go. Now," she hissed. The security feeds just went dark. Someone cut the lines from the inside. Marcus didn't hesitate. He lunged for the small, brushed aluminum hard drive sitting on David's desk. The backup that contained the last 3 months of David's private communications. David lunged forward, his glass shattering on the floor. But Marcus was faster. He shoved the drive into his pocket just as a second volley of gunfire rattled the windows of the executive suite. "Sarah, how did you—" "I've been watching the transfers, Marcus," she said, her voice trembling but urgent. "I'm sorry, I should have told you sooner. I was trying to be sure. I have the logs of the offshore accounts. We need to move." They scrambled toward the private service elevator, leaving David standing in the center of his office, the smell of spilled scotch and ozone filling the air. As the elevator doors hissed shut, Marcus saw David reach for his phone, his face a mask of calm, predatory intent. The elevator began its descent, the floor humming beneath Marcus's expensive Italian loafers. The lights flickered, casting Sarah's face in a strobe of sickly yellow. "The lobby is a kill zone," Sarah whispered, pushing her glasses up her nose. "They're coming up the main stairs. We have to hit the basement and get to the parking garage." "Who are they, Sarah?" Marcus demanded, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. "Contractors. David's been paying a security firm out of the miscellaneous fund for months. He didn't just want you out of the company, Marcus. He wanted you erased." The elevator jolted to a halt at the basement level. The doors opened to a cavernous space filled with the smell of damp concrete and diesel exhaust. The silence here was heavy, broken only by the distant, rhythmic clack, clack, clack of a loose fan belt somewhere in the dark. They moved through the shadows, ducking behind concrete pillars. Every scrape of their shoes sounded like a gunshot in the vaulted space. "There," Marcus whispered, pointing toward his silver sedan. "If we can get to the car, we can—" "Marcus, is that you?" A figure stepped out from behind a structural column. It was Michael Davis, the firm's lead auditor. He looked exactly as he always did, rigid, military posture, his suit pressed to a razor edge. He held a leather briefcase in one hand, but his other hand was tucked inside his jacket. "Michael," Marcus breathed, a wave of relief washing over him. "Thank God. David's lost his mind. He's got gunmen in the lobby. We need to get out of here and get to the authorities." Michael didn't move. He didn't look toward the exits. He looked directly at Marcus, his eyes unreadable. He began to hum, a low, haunting melody that Marcus didn't recognize, but it sent a shiver down his spine. It was a funeral dirge. "You shouldn't have gone into his desk, Marcus," Michael said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "It makes things so much more complicated." Marcus froze. "What are you talking about?" "The insurance policy," Michael said. "I witnessed it. I verified the signatures. I even helped David select the payout structure. 20 million is a very specific number. It covers the shortfall in the pension fund perfectly. Subverted phase 1. Smart decision." Marcus felt the world tilt, but he forced his mind to stay sharp. He had known Michael for 15 years. They had navigated 3 IRS audits and a hostile takeover together. Michael was a man of cold, hard facts. Marcus decided to appeal to that logic. He slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out the hard drive. "Michael, listen to me. I have the data. I have the records of David's blackmail and the offshore transfers. If you help me get this to the feds, I can guarantee you immunity. You're an auditor. You know how this works. You're a secondary player. If you turn now, you survive. You're too smart to go down for David's mess. He's a gambler, you're a mathematician. Look at the variables. Phase 2. False positive. Michael stopped humming. He looked at the hard drive, then back at Marcus. For a long second, the only sound was the drip of water from a leaky pipe. Then, Michael let out a long, weary sigh. He stepped forward and took his hand out of his jacket. He wasn't holding a weapon, he was holding a small digital recorder. "You're right, Marcus," Michael said, his voice softening. "David is sloppy. He's impulsive. I've been keeping my own records just in case he tried to turn on me. Give me the drive. My car is right there. It's armored. We can get to the Federal Plaza in 10 minutes. I have a contact in the U.S. Attorney's office." Marcus felt a massive weight lift from his chest. His shoulders dropped, and he handed the drive to Michael. "Thank you, Michael. I knew I could trust your sense of self-preservation." Phase 3. The crack. Michael took the drive and tucked it into his briefcase. He turned toward his car, a heavy black SUV. Marcus started to follow, but he stopped. Something was wrong. Michael didn't walk toward the driver's side. He walked toward the back and tapped the trunk twice. It was a signal. Marcus noticed Michael's gait. He was avoiding the left side of the garage entirely, making a wide, sweeping arc to stay on the right. It was a ritualistic movement, a quirk Marcus had seen before, but never understood. Then Marcus heard it, the sound of the SUV's doors unlocking, but not just the driver's side. All 4 doors clicked open simultaneously. Phase 4. Catastrophic reveal. The rear doors of the SUV swung open, and 2 men in tactical gear stepped out. They weren't police. They were the same masked gunmen from the lobby. Michael turned back to Marcus, and the warmth in his face had vanished, replaced by a terrifying, hollow mask. "I don't need immunity, Marcus. I need justice." "Do you know who James Taylor was?" Marcus blinked, confused. "The former VP? He died in an accident years ago." "What does that have to do with a hit and run?" Michael spat, his voice suddenly thick with venom. "Your firm's lawyers buried the truth to protect the IPO. David was driving, and you? You signed the check that bought the silence of the witnesses. You don't even remember his name, do you? But I remember the color of his socks that night. One red, one blue." The truth hit Marcus like a physical blow. Michael wasn't David's partner. He was a parasite that had spent years burrowing into the firm to destroy it from within. By giving Michael the drive, Marcus hadn't bought an ally. He had handed over the only evidence of his own innocence. "The drive doesn't just have David's emails, Marcus," Michael said, stepping back as the gunmen leveled their weapons. "I've spent the last hour uploading a virus from my terminal. By the time anyone looks at that drive, it will look like you were the one embezzling. It will look like you hired these men to kill David to cover your tracks. You didn't give me a lifeline. You gave me the rope to hang you." "Michael, wait. Take him," Michael commanded. The gunman lunged. Marcus spun, grabbing Sarah's hand, and bolted back toward the service stairs. Behind them, the roar of an engine echoed through the garage as the SUV began to give chase, the headlights cutting through the dark like the eyes of a predator. They burst through the heavy steel door of the stairwell, the sound of their own frantic breathing echoing against the concrete walls. Marcus's lungs burned, the metallic scent of ionized air from the building's ventilation system stinging his throat. "The car is gone," Sarah wheezed, her glasses sliding down her nose. "We're on foot. Marcus, what do we do?" Marcus didn't answer. He was counting. 1, 2, 3, 4. He tapped his knuckles against the railing as they climbed. He needed control. He needed a variable he could manage. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out expecting a threat, but it was a call from David. He swiped to answer. "Marcus." David's voice came through smooth and melodic, as if they were sitting in a board meeting. "I see you've met Michael. He's a bit of a fanatic, isn't he? A bit intense about the past." "You killed a man, David," Marcus snarled, ducking as a bullet chipped the concrete above his head. "We all have our little accidents, Marcus. But right now, you have a much bigger problem. The gunmen following you aren't mine. They're Michael's. And Michael doesn't want the money. He wants blood. If you want to live through the night, you're going to have to trust the man you actually know." "Trust you? You took out a life insurance policy on me." "A hedge, Marcus. Just a hedge. Listen to me. Get out of the building. There's a construction site in Oak Brook, the new Sterling Thorn Heights project. The gates are open. My personal security team is there. If you can make it there, I can protect you. We can pin everything on Michael. We can say he snapped. It's the only way we both walk away from this." Marcus reached the ground floor and kicked open a side exit, spilling out into a narrow, rain-slicked alley. The wind sheared between the skyscrapers, a cold, violent force that threatened to pull the breath from his lungs. He looked at Sarah. She was trembling, her eyes wide with terror. He looked back at the building, where the silhouettes of Michael's men were already appearing in the doorway. "We go to the site," Marcus said. "Marcus, no. David is a snake," Marcus interrupted. "But Michael is a ghost. You can't fight a ghost." "We go to the site, we find David's security team, and we use them to buy us enough time to get to the press. It's the only move left on the board." They sprinted toward the end of the alley, where a discarded delivery truck sat idling, its driver nowhere to be seen. Marcus didn't think. He acted. He shoved Sarah into the passenger seat, threw the truck into gear, and roared out into the Chicago traffic, the wipers screaming against the windshield as they fled toward the suburbs. The drive to Oak Brook was a blur of neon lights and hydroplaning tires. Marcus kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, watching for the black SUV. But the road remained empty. The silence was worse than the chase. It felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for the final movement of the piece. They reached the construction site an hour later. It was a skeletal forest of raw timber and steel girders, rising out of the mud like a graveyard of ambition. The air was thick with the smell of sawdust and wet earth. "The gates are open," Sarah whispered, pointing toward the towering iron entrance. Marcus drove the truck through the perimeter. The second the rear tires cleared the threshold, a heavy, mechanical clunk echoed through the night. The gates swung shut with a violent force, the iron bars meeting with a sound like a guillotine blade. Marcus slammed on the brakes. He looked at the dashboard. The GPS screen flickered, then dissolved into a static of red and black. The doors locked with a synchronized thud. "David?" Marcus whispered, grabbing his phone. The phone emitted a high-pitched, piercing frequency that made Marcus drop it onto the floorboards. His ears rang, a sharp, stabbing pain behind his eyes. Outside, the site was silent. No security team, no lights. Only the rhythmic, bone-shaking thud of a distant pile driver, a mechanical heartbeat in the dark. "It's a trap," Sarah said, her voice small and hollow. "Marcus, he lured us into a cage." Before Marcus could respond, the world tilted. A massive shadow swept over the truck. He looked up through the windshield just in time to see a heavy construction crane, its long arms silhouetted against the gray sky, swinging a massive load of steel girders directly over them. "Out! Get out now!" Marcus threw his shoulder against the door. It was deadlocked. He grabbed a heavy metal flashlight from the glove box and smashed it against the side window. The glass shattered into 1,000 diamonds. He scrambled through the jagged opening, pulling Sarah after him, their clothes tearing on the metal. They hit the mud just as the crane operator released the load. The sound was cataclysmic. Tons of steel slammed into the roof of the truck, flattening it like an aluminum can. The shockwave threw Marcus forward, his face sliding into the cold, gritty muck. The smell of leaking gasoline and pulverized rubber filled the air. He scrambled to his feet, pulling Sarah toward a deep concrete trench that ran alongside the foundation of the main building. They dived into the dark, the cold concrete biting into Marcus's palms. "Stay down," he hissed, his heart hammering against his ribs. Above them, the crane began to move again, its heavy chain rattling like a ghost's shackles. Footsteps echoed on the wooden planks above, heavy, rhythmic boots. Marcus pulled his laptop from his bag. He had grabbed it from the office in the chaos. The screen's glow was too bright in the dark trench, so he threw his jacket over his head, creating a small, suffocating tent. "What are you doing?" Sarah whispered, her teeth chattering. "Checking the drive," Marcus said, his fingers flying across the keys. "I made a copy of the encrypted files before I gave the drive to Michael. I need to see what David was so afraid of." He bypassed the security layers, his mind focused on the logic of the code. He ignored the fear, ignored the cold, ignored the sound of the men searching the site above. He focused on the numbers. The file opened. It wasn't a record of embezzlement. It was a series of video files and scanned police reports from 20 years ago. Marcus watched the screen, his breath hitching. The video was grainy, taken from an old security camera. It showed a silver Lexus speeding through a rainy intersection. A man, James Taylor, stepped off the curb. The impact was sickeningly silent on the muted footage. The car didn't stop, but it wasn't David Sterling behind the wheel. Marcus zoomed in on the driver's face. It was a woman with silver-streaked hair and a terrified expression. Jennifer Wilson, the head of the board, the woman who held the swing vote for the IPO. "David isn't the mastermind," Marcus whispered, the realization washing over him like ice water. "He's been blackmailing Jennifer for 2 decades. He used the hit and run to force her to approve his expansion plans. And now, Jennifer is trying to kill us both to bury the secret forever." "So David is a pawn?" Sarah asked. "A pawn who thought he was a king," Marcus said. "But he's losing control. Michael Davis is James Taylor's brother. He found out the truth, and he's using David's own greed to burn the whole thing down. He doesn't want the money, Sarah. He wants everyone who touched that cover-up to die." A text message lit up Marcus's phone, which he had managed to retrieve from the truck. It was a photo of Sarah, not the Sarah sitting next to him, but a photo of her from her own social media, with a red X drawn over her face. "Sign the IPO disclosures in 6 hours, or the girl dies. We know you have a second copy. Asterisk." Marcus looked at Sarah. She was staring at the screen, her face white. "They think they have you," Marcus said. "They don't know you jumped out of the truck." "Marcus, look." Sarah pointed toward the top of the trench. A figure was standing there, silhouetted by the moonlight. It was Michael Davis. He wasn't wearing a mask. He was holding a heavy iron pipe, and he was looking down at them with a smile that was more of a snarl. "The math is changing, Marcus," Michael said, his voice echoing in the trench. "The IPO is going to happen. Jennifer will sign the papers. David will get his payout. And then I'm going to blow the building, all of you, in one place. One final audit." Michael lunged into the trench, Marcus didn't think. He swung the laptop like a club, the plastic casing shattering against Michael's ribs. They tumbled into the mud, a chaotic mess of limbs and suppressed rage. Marcus felt a fist slam into his jaw, the taste of copper filling his mouth. He gripped Michael's throat, his knuckles white. "You destroyed my life," Michael wheezed, his eyes bloodshot. "I didn't even know his name," Marcus screamed, slamming Michael's head against the concrete wall. "I was a junior associate. I didn't sign anything." "You stayed silent," Michael roared, finding a sudden burst of strength. He shoved Marcus back and scrambled out of the trench, disappearing into the maze of the construction site. Marcus lay in the mud, gasping for air. He felt a hand on his shoulder. "We have to go back," Sarah said. "The 50th floor. That's where the final signing is. If we can get there before the deadline, we can stop the upload." Marcus stood up, wiping the blood from his lip. He looked at his watch. 5 hours left. "We're not just going to stop it," Marcus said, his voice cold and precise. "We're going to broadcast it." The trip back to the city was a desperate race against the clock. They ditched the truck and stole a discarded sedan from a nearby commuter lot. Marcus drove with a surgical intensity, weaving through the late-night traffic like a ghost. They reached the Sterling Thorne building just as the sun began to bleed over the horizon, casting the skyscrapers in a bruised purple light. The lobby was swarming with police, but they weren't looking for gunmen anymore. They were looking for Marcus. David filed the incompetency claim, Marcus whispered, seeing his own face on the news monitors in the lobby window. "I'm a fugitive." "The freight entrance," Sarah said. "It's on the north side. The sensors are old. They use a physical key card, not the biometric scanners." They slipped through the loading dock, the smell of trash and wet cardboard filling the air. They climbed the service stairs, 50 flights of grueling concrete steps. Marcus's legs felt like lead, his breath coming in ragged gasps. They reached the penthouse level and slipped through the heavy steel door. The office was dark, the only light coming from the massive LED jumbotron on the building's exterior, which cast a rhythmic strobe of blue and pink light through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Marcus moved toward the executive terminal. "If I can tap into the main server, I can—" The lights flickered on. David Sterling was sitting in Marcus's chair. He was holding a glass of scotch, and he looked remarkably relaxed. Michael Davis stood behind him, his face bruised, but his posture still rigid. "You're late, Marcus," David said, checking his watch. 4 minutes and 12 seconds, to be precise. "I expected better of you." "It's over, David," Marcus said, stepping into the light. "I know about Jennifer. I know about the hit and run." David's smile didn't waver. He stood up and walked toward the window, looking out at the city. "Knowing is one thing, Marcus. Proving is another. And as of 3 hours ago, you are legally non-compos mentis. Your testimony is worthless. Your evidence is fabricated by a man having a mental breakdown." He held up a sheaf of papers. "The IPO disclosures. Jennifer has already signed her portion. All that's left is your signature, which I have already provided via very sophisticated digital forgery. The filing is happening in 10 minutes. "And then what?" Marcus asked. "Michael blows the building?" David glanced back at Michael. "Michael is an enthusiast. He has his own plans. But I've made him a better offer. A seat on the new board, total control of the audit department. It turns out everyone has a price, even the righteous." Michael didn't look at Marcus. He was staring at the jumbotron outside, his eyes fixed on the flickering advertisements. Subverted Phase 1. Smart decision. Marcus realized he couldn't win with logic. He had to win with the system. He knew the building's smart controls better than anyone. He had designed the security protocols himself. He slowly backed toward the wall, his hand hovering near the fire suppression override. "You're right, David," Marcus said, his voice calm. "I am a perfectionist, and a perfectionist always builds a back door. If you let Sarah go, I'll give you the master key to the encrypted server. You won't have to worry about Michael or Jennifer ever again. You'll have total control." Marcus knew this was the only way. David's greed was his greatest weakness. If he thought he could cut out his co-conspirators, he would take the bait. Marcus would trigger the gas, grab Sarah, and use the chaos to reach the server room. Phase 2. False positive. David paused, his glass halfway to his lips. He looked at Michael, then back at Marcus. "A master key? You kept a physical override?" "In the ventilation shaft behind the main terminal," Marcus said. "I can show you the sequence." David nodded slowly. "Michael, take the girl to the hallway." "Marcus, show me." Michael grabbed Sarah's arm and pulled her toward the door. She looked back at Marcus, her eyes filled with a desperate hope. Marcus gave her a tiny, imperceptible nod. As soon as the door closed, he reached for the override. Phase 3. The crack. Marcus pressed the hidden button. He waited for the hiss of the halon gas, the blinding white fog that would give him the opening he needed. But the hiss didn't come. Instead, a low, rhythmic beeping sound began to emanate from the ceiling. It wasn't the fire system. It was the sound of a digital countdown. Marcus looked at the terminal. The screen wasn't showing the server status. It was showing a live feed of the building's structural supports in the basement. There were small black boxes attached to the primary load-bearing columns. Phase 4. Catastrophic reveal. David started to laugh, a dry, rattling sound. "You think you're the only one who knows the building, Marcus?" Michael didn't take my offer. He took my access. The door burst open, and Michael stepped back in, alone. He was holding a remote detonator. "I didn't want a seat on the board, David," Michael said, his voice trembling with a terrifying joy. "I wanted the keys to the furnace." Michael looked at Marcus. "The master key you just activated? It didn't trigger the fire system. It armed the charges. You just finished the circuit for me. In 5 minutes, this building becomes a tomb. And because you're the one who triggered the sequence from your personal terminal, the world will see it as your final act of madness. A murder-suicide to take down the firm you couldn't keep." Marcus lunged for the terminal, but Michael shoved him back. "It's a one-way street, Marcus. No left turns, remember?" The jumbotron outside flickered. The advertisement for a luxury watch vanished, replaced by Marcus's own face. A news ticker ran across the bottom. "Breaking disgraced CEO. Marcus Thorne believed to be holding hostages in Sterling Thorne penthouse. Police preparing to breach." Marcus looked at David. The charismatic predator was finally showing fear. He was trapped in his own trap, facing a man who didn't care about money, power, or survival. "Michael, stop," David pleaded, his voice cracking. "We can talk about this. I'll give you everything." "You already gave me everything," Michael said, holding up the detonator. "You gave me the chance to finish the story." Marcus stood up. He didn't look at the detonator. He looked at the jumbotron. He looked at the thousands of people on the street below, looking up at his face. He realized he had spent his whole life trying to control the variables, trying to build a world where he was never vulnerable. And in doing so, he had built his own cage. He looked at Sarah, who was huddled in the corner. He looked at the terminal. The Jumbotron. Marcus whispered. It's on a separate circuit. He lunged not for Michael, but for the wall. He kicked through a temporary drywall partition, his foot sinking into the hollow space. He reached inside and grabbed a thick bundle of fiber optic cables. "What are you doing?" Michael screamed, raising the detonator. Marcus didn't answer. He pulled the cables with everything he had, the sharp glass fibers slicing into his palms. He shoved the end of the bundle into the high-voltage outlet of the executive terminal. A massive spark erupted, the smell of scorched ozone filling the room. The terminal shrieked, a high-pitched wail of dying electronics. Outside, the Jumbotron flickered. The news report vanished. For a second, the screen was black. Then, a new image appeared. It was the video from Marcus's laptop. The silver Lexus, the hit and run, Jennifer Wilson's face. And then, the audio began to play. The recording Marcus had made of David's confession in the office and Michael's admission of the bombing plot. The entire city of Chicago was watching. The thousands of people on the street were hearing the truth, broadcast in a 100-foot-tall wall of light and sound. Michael froze, his thumb hovering over the button. He looked out the window at the screen, his face bathed in the blue light of his own defeat. The audit was no longer private. The ledger was open for the world to see. The police breach was sudden and violent. The windows shattered as tactical teams swung in on ropes, the sound of flashbangs deafening. Marcus fell to his knees, his hands bleeding, his heart finally slowing its frantic pace. He watched as the police tackled Michael and David, the two men who had tried to turn his life into a mathematical equation. He looked at Sarah. She was standing by the door, her glasses gone, her face streaked with tears. She walked over to him and sat on the floor, ignoring the chaos around them. "Is it over?" she whispered. Marcus looked out at the city. The Jumbotron was still playing the loop of the truth. The firm was gone. His reputation was a wreck. His fortune would be tied up in legal battles for a decade. "Yes," Marcus said. "The math finally adds up." The next morning, the sun rose over a different Chicago. Marcus sat in a small, quiet diner on the edge of the city. The smell of old coffee and cheap bacon was the most beautiful thing he had ever experienced. He looked at the clock on the wall. It was 8 a.m. He didn't check his watch. He didn't count the tiles on the ceiling. He didn't feel the need to check the locks. He was a man with nothing left to lose, and for the first time in 42 years, he felt like he was finally holding the matches. He took a bite of his toast, closed his eyes, and listened to the sound of the world waking up. A messy, beautiful, unpredictable world that he no longer had to control.